Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Velero community meetings. My name is Jonas Roslin. I'll be your host today. I'm going to put up the meeting agenda here for you all to see. We've got a bunch of stuff that we want to cover today, and we also want to cover the beta that's coming up. So let me just share my screen. All right. If you have any questions regarding anything that we talk about here, please just unmute yourself. Or if you can't speak or if your mic is broken, just put your question in the chat and I'll read it out loud. First off, we have some great stuff from Adnan that we've been working on. Adnan, do you wanna cover this?
Hey, yeah. Maybe it's easier if I share my screen actually.
Sure thing.
Okay, can everyone see that?
Yeah, can you make the words a little bigger there? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so the first thing here is we added CPU requests limit settings in the Velero install commands. Now you can see that you can provide these flags for both the Velero pod and the Restic pod. And that way you can configure the limits and requests that you need in your environment when you run a Velero install. So that's the first thing. And then the next thing was the backup resource list. So currently, if I did Velero get back, sorry, yeah, here, I have two backups. And if I do a describe on this Nginx backup here, I get some information back about that backup, but can't really easily see what's actually in this. So now if I run -- details here, I actually get a list back of all the resources that were backed up as part of this backup. So now this is output when you do -- details. And in the bucket, you can see this is stored in a JSON file. So for a particular backup, you can see there's now this resource list JSON file here, which contains that metadata. For older backups that were taken prior to the current version, or the version that is to be released, I suppose, when this file isn't available, you'll see a message like this saying the backup resource list was not found, and that's probably because the backup was taken with an older version that didn't create that metadata. But yeah, so that feature is now there. That's all I have. Any questions on that?
So this feature will be going into 1.1. Is that correct?
Yeah, and should be available in the beta that we cut.
And so, Adnan, are we going to publish any? So, along with resource limits, do we have any guidance for users with regard to what resources are like normally used? I know that you did a bunch of research there.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we don't set any limits or default limits and requests for the Restic pod because we found that varies quite a lot depending on the size of volumes that you're backing up or the type of volumes. But for the Velero pods, we did some research and we kind of found I guess a high enough upper bound to set for those requests and limits. And if I remember correctly, we have a limit of 500 millicores. I'll have to go and check the docs. It's in the docs.
Great.
But yeah, I think the CPU limit is 500 millicores and the memory is 256 megabytes.
Okay, that's great.
And the default values that we came up with will be the defaults that are used if you run Velero install without specifying the flags. So we'll now create it with those default values, but if you find you need to tune it for your particular use case, you can always just specify the flags to override them.
Yeah, I think the one thing we need to do is still move those defaults to the chart, which I think currently doesn't have any defaults. So that one's still pending.
Awesome. Thank you, Adnan. Any questions there? All right, moving over to Steve. You have a design doc for copying PVs when remapping namespaces during restore.
Yeah, so I can share my screen. I have it up here. Let's see this one. Too many windows open. Okay, so yeah, so we've had an issue in the backlog for a long time around the use case where you want to essentially take a namespace that's running in your cluster and create a second copy of it. And so in Velero today, you can do this using the namespace mappings flag on the Velero restore create command. So you can essentially take a backup of namespace 1 and then restore it using this namespace mappings flag into, for example, namespace 2. And so that would give you a copy of the namespace and all of the objects that are within that namespace. But the problem with this is that if your namespace is using any persistent volumes and persistent volume claims, Velero doesn't currently know how to essentially create a second copy of the persistent volume that's being used. So when it does a restore into the new namespace, into the mapped namespace, the PVC that gets created there just tries to claim the same persistent volume that's being used in the source namespace. And that doesn't work because you can't have multiple PVCs claiming the same PV. So this has been an issue for folks who have been trying to use the namespace mappings flag to create copies of namespaces. So I put up a design doc for addressing this and basically enabling Velero to create copies of PVs in this particular scenario. The original issue is linked here in the introduction, and there's a bunch of commentary there from users and some discussion about what the user experience should look like for this. But what I've proposed in this document is basically doesn't require any additional flags to be specified by the user. Velero can essentially detect that if you're using the namespace mappings flag and there are persistent volumes that are being restored, and they already exist in the cluster, Velero will detect that it should create a copy of that PV to be used by the second namespace. So had some feedback from this already from some of the folks who have been interested in getting this implemented. And in general, it seems like the approach makes sense and is gonna solve the issues for folks. But certainly if anyone else has interest in this use case, please take a look at this design document and add any comments you have. It's currently just a pull request, this number 1705. So feel free to add any comments you might have here. And we look forward to implementing this pretty soon.
So Steve, what's a common use case for this? Why would someone do this?
Yeah, it's a good question. There are, you know, I think the most common reason you do this is maybe maybe you have a cluster where you're running both production and testing workloads, and you want to maybe take a copy of the production namespace and create a test copy of it, either so that you can test out some new functionality or do some debugging of an issue in the production environment. That's definitely a common one we've seen. You know, this also may come up if you have maybe a shared development cluster and you're trying to create kind of additional copies of namespaces for individuals to use for their development process.
Cool, that makes sense. Thanks.
Yep.
Do we have any questions here?
I heard someone typed on our Slack channel the concept of forking a namespace. I thought that was a very interesting way to say it.
I had a quick question about I'm wondering about the use case which is kind of more relevant to what we're doing, where we're actually doing a migration to a new cluster. So in that case, we might change a namespace and the original may not actually be there, but it might. I mean, it depends on why we're doing that. I'm assuming this is something that would work whether or not the original PVs were there.
Yeah, so the idea as I've proposed it is that we basically check and see if the original PV is there, and if it is, we'll create a second copy of it. If it's not, we'll just restore it as is, essentially.
Got it. Okay.
So, yeah.
Good, thanks.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Next up, Carlesia. Got some VMworld info.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, if in case anyone who watches this now or later is at VMware, there are 3 talks that are going to feature Velero. And there is a PR open that for restoring based on the pod volume backup resources, as opposed to finding out what we need to restore from pod annotations, and that's RESTIC related. If anybody is interested, but that's going to go out with version 1.1 too.
Cool. Any questions there?
I think one of those sessions is Efri. I believe Efri's on the call today.
Hi, Efri.
Hi.
Awesome. I think that ties well into the next topic here, the beta that is coming out very, very soon. Steve, you want to talk a little about the beta?
Yeah, so we've been working on burning down the scope for version 1.1, and we're just wrapping up the last handful of issues. So we're planning to ship a beta release for 1.1, probably within the next day or 2 days, but I would say definitely by the end of this week. So we'll definitely send out notifications on the mailing list and the Slack channel, et cetera, when that goes out. So we definitely love it if anyone has time and can do a little bit of testing on that, that'd be great. And you can check out some of the new features that we've shipped. We'll have a full set of release notes that covers all of that. But we'll also be testing it ourselves for a short period of time, and then once we feel confident in the quality of that, we'll ship the official 1.1 release.
Cool. And that's planned for end of August. Is that right?
I think, yeah, by end of August. I mean, we'll see how testing goes, and if things are generally looking pretty good, we'll ship sooner. If we have some bugs to fix, it may take a little bit longer, but certainly by end of August, I think a 1.1 should be out.
That sounds good. Any questions regarding the 1.1 or the beta that's coming out? Of course, regular caution applies here. Don't use beta stuff in production, but absolutely test it out in your development and test clusters. One thing that we talked about at a previous community meeting here last month was the Velero user survey. And I just want to bring this up again so people can see it. This is a really good way for everyone on the call, the entire Velero community, to kind of give the Velero team feedback on what's important and how Velero is being used, and how the community sees Kubernetes PVs and backups and everything. The user survey is online here. Right now we have a bunch of really good answers. We have a free form part of this at the end, where you can tell us what you would like to see in future revisions or future versions here of Velero. This really helps when we do planning for future releases of Velero and future enhancements. So please head over and take the Velero survey. If you head over to velero.io, you have a link to the survey up here to the right as well, so you can easily find it there. Yeah, so please take that survey. It's super important to all of us to make sure that we do the planning correctly.
And just a point there, we are going to be collating all of the results, anonymizing those, and publishing them back to the community. So it's not just our learnings; it's everyone. So so please make your voice heard.
Yes, definitely. Last thing we want to cover here today, if there are no other questions here, is a contributor shout out. Steve.
Yeah, Carthew D submitted a pull request to add support for Velero to log in JSON format rather than the kind of default text format that we get. So we have a new CLI flag to the Velero server command that you can use to specify this. This was something that I think he had developed for his use of Velero and wanted to contribute it upstream. So we're super happy to have that contribution, and hopefully it benefits some other users as well. So thanks a lot.
That's really cool. Are there any other outstanding questions from the people on the call here? All right. Looks like we're cutting the meeting a little short today. Thank you all for joining, and please, again, please answer the user survey and reach out to us on Slack if you need anything. Thank you so much for joining, everyone, and have a wonderful week.
Thanks,
Bye.
Jonas. Thanks, everyone.